All right. Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah Bahashem, Rakakwadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples to his younger brothers. And peace and blessings and salutation to the hopeful elect out there pushing his word in truth and in sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shah Bahashem, Rakakwadash. Pushing to get up out of there. Shalom to the hopeful leg, the believers, the listeners who have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashim Al-Shai. All right, and what I want to get into this morning, dealing with the rededication. All right, the rededication. And speaking of the rededication of the nation of Israel, all right, and there's a remnant whom the Lord, all right, has predestined to wake up in these last days to be rededicated unto Him. Okay, because this world, all right, cultivated us to be rebellious against our power, and as we find out who we are, we find out who our power is, the names, we begin to learn the doctrine, the understanding, okay, righteousness, we begin to rededicate ourselves to our true power, because this world had us dedicated to everything else but our power, man, okay? So it's a privilege, for the Lord to allow us to wake up and to be able to rededicate ourselves, all right, in these last days right before the deliverance. Okay, so I got some precepts I want to get into because it begins with us remembering who we are, remembering what to be dedicated to. Okay, because once we understand and awaken to being Israelites, when you read 2 Peter 3:1, this is the Apostle Peter writing to Israelite foreigners, those who had completely, lost the way, lost who they were, they was fully engulfed, okay, into the way of the heathen, just like we were. Okay, when we awakened to the truth, we was fully engulfed, okay, into westernization, which is the modern Hellenization, because these Israelites was Hellenized, okay, by the Greeks, okay, we was westernized by the same people, man, these Greeks coming back, okay, these Romans coming back, these Edomites, man, you see? And it says, 2 Peter 3:1, it says, the second epistle, beloved, I now write unto you, in both which I stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance. So our pure minds are being stirred up by the way of remembrance. By what? This word. You see? This word is activating the remembrance in us, man. The will of the elect. The Lord has it set up to where when we hear this word, it activates a remembrance. Okay, we begin to start snapping into it. We begin to start coming into ourselves, man. All right, just as it speaks about in the book of in the book of Baruch, chapter 2. All right, it's the book of Baruch, chapter 2, and verse I started at 30. It says, for I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people. But in the land of their captivity, they shall remember themselves. Okay? So as our disobedience will have us scattered throughout the world in captivity, mainly over here in the Western Hemisphere, well, it was a point in time when the Lord would allow us to begin to remember ourselves, man. Starting with High Priest Elder Abba Bibbins, okay, which we know is John the Baptist coming back in his lot, okay, to be the forerunner for Yahweh Shai, you see, and what they began the awakening, okay, of the hopeful elect. Okay, the hopeful elect began to remember themselves in the lands of their captivity. Okay, all these camps, all right, these the teaching, the videos. Well, this is the Lord, all right, awakening His people and stirring them up to remember themselves, man. Okay, there's a remnant that will come back to the remembrance, and see, not only because we don't come back to remember ourselves just to throw on a costume for the internet, for social media. No, we come back to a standard. We come back to obedience. We come back to an expectation. There's a certain conduct that we come back to. Okay? We're not just, niggas with fringes on. Okay? or nigga women with head wraps on. No, it's beyond that. All right, because a lot of people that know they Israelites, they are just cosplaying. You know, they are just putting on the outward appearance of an Israelite, but really not changing. Because coming back to who we are, all right, really rededicating ourselves, man. We're coming back to a standard. We're coming back to a behavior, a conduct, a certain etiquette. You see, we'll come back to a culture and inheritance, man. You see, beginning with what? The inward man. You see, so as we remember ourselves and we begin to rededicate ourselves, man, there's a drastic change and it begins inwardly. We begin to put off everything about, all right, the West, man. All right, the way we was taught and brought up, we begin to put all that off, man, and fully rededicate ourselves to our power. And that's the only way that we can rededicate ourselves to Yahweh by Shema Shai, by putting this off, man. You know, by putting this off completely. Every thought, every mindset, every way we thought was right. No, we gotta completely put that off, man. You know, to rededicate ourselves to our power. And it says, verse 31, and shall know. Well, I started verse 30 again. Said, for I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people. But in the land of their captivity they shall remember themselves, and shall know that I am the Lord their power, for I will give them a heart and ears to hear. Okay? So the Lord will give us the spirit to be obedient. He will give us, you know, the mind to be able to comprehend, okay, this word, man. You see, everyone doesn't have the mind, the spirit to comprehend this word, to digest this word. You see, everyone doesn't have the stomach for Yahushua, which is the scriptures. Or Yahushua comes in the volume of the book. Okay? So to really tap into Yahushua, what the Lord has to endow us with a certain spirit. Okay? So we can grow in understanding. You know, so we can really start to conform. Okay? So verse 32, it says, and they shall praise me in the land of their captivity, and think upon my name, which the name of the Father is Yahweh, the name of the Son is Yahushua. You know, so we come back, because even, let's say, coming back to those names, there's a conduct, there's an expectation, there's a standard with those names. Okay? You see, we don't come to those names with the same behavior of this world, the same mindset of this world. No, we begin to make those drastic changes, man. You know, it's a constant, all right, work in progress until the coming of Yahushua, which is when we're going to be perfected, man. Okay? And I want to go here in the book of 2 Kings, because this is this what inspired me to do this lesson. Now, this is during the time of Josiah, which he had came behind, you know, his father and his grandfather. Them niggas was wicked. Okay? And Josiah, all right, he came and he was a king that did, you know, the most drastic reform of the southern kings. Okay? Like you know, you have other kings of the southern kingdom. Okay? You had other kings of Judah that did reforms, but Josiah did the most drastic reform. Okay? When he began to tear down the idols, and you know, it's a good read. You read 2 Kings, the 23rd chapter, the whole chapter. So I'm gonna read verses 1 through 3. Get to the point. It said, this is on 2 Kings 20:23. It says, then the king summoned all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem, and the king went up to the temple of the Lord with all the people of Judah and Jerusalem, along with the priests and the prophets and the people from the least to the greatest. There the king read to them the entire book of the covenant that had been found in the Lord's temple. So they tap back into the scriptures. You know, because his father was out here wilding, heavy into idolatry, man. You see? But Josiah represented a generation of reform. Just like the elect in this time, we represent a generation that's being reformed for righteousness, man. We're separated from the ways of our fathers and, you know, parents and grandparents. You know? We're separated from the ways and the traditions, okay, that we was brought up in, and we began to reform in righteousness, man, because we was brought up in what a Greco-Roman culture, man. You see, which is a complete rebellion to our power. Okay, so this is that generation in which the Lord breaks that cycle of rebellion and starts to raise up an elect. Okay, that will begin to what, rededicate themselves to Him. You see, so um, read on. It said the king took his place of authority beside the pillar and renewed the covenant in the Lord's presence. He pledged to obey the Lord by keeping all his commands, laws, and decrees with all his heart and soul. In this way, he confirmed all the terms of the covenant that were written in the scroll, and all the people pledged themselves to the covenant. Okay? So this was still, during their first covenant. Okay? And Josiah, he rededicated himself being king. Okay? And the people, all right, following in like manner, they rededicated themselves to their covenant, man, to be obedient. You see, and this time in this grace period, we're pledged to be, to the best of our ability, obedient, man. And to be faithful unto death. Okay? And we begin to live our day. All right, we begin to live day for day to be pleasing to our power. Okay? The Lord has put the Spirit on His elect to rededicate themselves unto Him. Okay? In the world that's completely against righteousness, man, there's a remnant that's rededicating themselves to righteousness of Yahweh Bashim Al Shai in these last days, man. Okay? And let's go here. Like I said, that's 2 Kings 23, a good read, that chapter. But let's go here. Another one in the book of Baruch. All right, this is the book of Baruch, chapter 4, and verse this Baruch 4 and 28. It said, "For as it were your mind to go astray from the Most High, so being returned, seek Him 10 times more." Okay, so as we went astray from our power, and the Lord saw it fit to have mercy and bring us back, man, how much more should we be tapped in? And then our culture is the best culture, man. Our way is the best way. You see, we have the superior way of existing in the earth, man. The law, statutes, and commandments, the wisdom of the scriptures, that's the best way to exist in the earth. And the Lord has to where the elect begin to fall in love with righteousness, man. And that's why this superior way is going to be enforced at the return of Yahushua. Okay, ain't no other way to be outside, okay, of the prescribed, all right, wisdom of Yahweh Bashim Al Shai. There's no other way to exist, man. Okay, and this what this captivity has taught us, man. That this is because we done had both, okay, both worlds, man. You see, and we see that this way is far better, man. Following the Lord is far better than this madness they call a society, man. Okay? So, Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you few sisters edified once again to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai Bahashem, Rakakwadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers. And peace and blessings, salutations to the whole elect. Shalom.